Kia ora, Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 1848, Historical Events. Yes, so this week I'm talking about this diving deeper into DNA matches that I have in Ancestry. And, totally forgot to take my hair down. Oh, well, you're just going to deal with a hit mess here today. It's been a very busy day. I've just hopped off a training straight onto this. The training's still going on, so I'm going to miss the last few minutes of it, but that's okay. So this week we've been talking about the genealogy research that I've been doing into DNA matches that I have on Ancestry and some of the interesting things that have come up. Today we're going to talk about historical events. And this plays a huge part in your ancestry because it makes history becomes alive for you when you make a personal connection to a time and place. So you could have an ancestor that was involved in the Civil War in the United States. You could have an ancestor that they were a part of the Civil War. What role did they play? Where did they fight? Where did they see action and all that? So you start researching the historical events that took place. You get hold of their Civil War military records, so you can see their track of where they were and what they did, and you can go and find out what battles that they were involved with, find out more information about. And those events, and I find that those events, historical events and stuff, start coming alive for people when they have that personal connection. That personal connection being an ancestor that was there. You've got the earthquake of 1906. Why do I have a personal connection to the earthquake of 1906 in San Francisco? Very simply because I have a great-grand uncle who claimed to be American, and when they wanted proof of his of him being American, and he was a bad dude. I have to tell you, he was a really bad dude. He got arrested for treason in Australia during World War II. He was a Nazi sympathizer. He actually embezzled funds from the Nazis. He was a bad dude, and then he was trying to say, well, you can't, he was trying to get them to send him back to Germany because they were saying he was German. He was of German descent. He was not born in Germany. He was actually born in New Zealand. He was born to my second great-grandmother, who this was her second husband. So he's actually only a half great-granduncle. No, he's still a great-granduncle. Because he was my great-grandmother's half-brother. Yes. But my second great-grandmother was his mother, and he claimed he didn't know who his mother was. He claimed that he was born in Germany. The Germans said he's not ours. Then he claimed he was born in the US. They said, prove it. He said, I can't. The documents were destroyed in the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. So that is my personal connection to the 1906. I was going, okay, let me go learn more about the 1906 earthquake. So I did that. But I knew that he wasn't born there, because then he was turning around saying that he was born in American waters off the coast of California. Yeah, no, he was born on the west coast of New Zealand in a little mining town. But this chapter about his life was very, very interesting on the fact of what he was claiming and what he wasn't. He was a tyrant. And I'm reading this going, this guy's awful. And then I had to remind myself, it's your great-granduncle. And I'm sort of like, oh, yeah, that's right. The fact that I have that in my family, okay. But there's different events. And yesterday I came across another one. This one, I'm working on a leg to see how this person fits into my tree. So we've got the DNA match. I'm working on the tree on from their side of it, and also, well, I'm not sure where it comes into my tree. So I'm working on their side of it with the information that I have from their tree to see what I can find out connected and how it connects to my tree. Interestingly enough, I came across one of the people in their tree who I'm not sure how they're related to me at this point in time, or if they are actually a blood relative, but they were killed at Gallipoli. Now, in all of my research that I have done over the years, I have never had a family member who was part of the Battle of Gallipoli back in 1914. It was the 25th of April, 25th of April 1915, when the ANZACs, Australian New Zealand Army Corps, invaded Gallipoli as part of that campaign that they were working. They were there for 8 months. It was a big bloody battle. They didn't win. They actually snuck out at the end of it. And I got to learn a lot about Gallipoli when I was back in New Zealand for Christmas in 2018. On New Year's Day for 2019, we actually went to Te Papa, which is the National Museum in Wellington there, and they had this incredible display of with the story of Gallipoli. You got to meet some of these people and hear stories about them. And they had Weta Productions, which is run by Peter Jackson and his crew there, created these statues that would play out some scene of some person, and then you go into this room and there would be this huge statue there, and they were like 3 times the size of a person. That's how big these statues were. They were big, but I tell you, the detail on these things was incredible. But you'd see this person, then you'd walk around the corner to the other room, and there would be the story of this person. There'd be this person's biography there and their story from Gallipoli. And then you would learn a little more about their time in Gallipoli based on their story. There'll be a display there for you. You could walk through. I mean, we even saw a scaled down model of the camp, of the conditions that they lived in and things, and you got to read all these stories and everything else. Like, there was a guy that was supposed to be supposed to be killed for treason. The statue is sitting there eating his last meal. He actually got a stay of execution simply because it turned out, and he was charged with treason because he fell asleep at his post. But then it turned out, then when they found the story behind it, that he had just been released from hospital. He still wasn't 100%. He had just been released from hospital after suffering whatever. So his body wasn't fully recovered. And so they said that that they would not execute him for treason. So he got pardoned. But the thing is that nobody actually knows what happened to this guy after that, which was interesting, reading all the story and stuff about him. And then at the end of this thing, it said that nobody knows what happened to this guy after he was pardoned from execution. There's no further record that when they were doing the research, they couldn't find any more about him in their records or anything. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Then you had the nurse that was sitting there. She came over on the Red Cross ship from New Zealand to support the soldiers and stuff. And they would bring the worst of the people from their hospital at their camp down to the ship, and where they would get better treatments. They had the surgeries there and all of that sort of stuff. And she'd been writing religiously to her brother. And when she got to Gallipoli, she was asking these soldiers as they're coming, well, do you know my brother? Do you know my brother? Do you know my brother? And when we come into this room where the statue is, she's sitting there holding these letters that had stamped across the front. There was a bundle of letters that had stamped across the front of it, killed in action. That's how she found out her brother had been killed. And she's sitting there holding it, and she's got tears streaming down her face. It was unbelievable. These statues would just pull at your heartstrings. You would see there was one with a doctor there who looked so broken because there's a body laying in front of him that he tried to save and he couldn't because of the injuries this guy had suffered. There was another one where these guys are like, they've got the machine gun, they're firing that machine gun. They've got a mate over here who's laying on the ground dead. They've got another guy over here who's trying to help out. These statues were just amazing, and reading their stories really tore at my heartstrings. And in all the years I've been doing genealogy research, even for clients, I have never come across anybody who was at Gallipoli, who had a connection to Gallipoli until last night. And all that stuff that I had learned, that I had seen and been part of, you went on this emotional journey. They say it takes about 20 minutes to go through this thing. Yeah, if you race through, but my mum and dad and I, we read everything. We looked at everything. We analyzed everything. We're like, look at this. Oh my gosh. We're pointing out things on the different models that they had built up. And we just took our time. We took 2.5 hours to get through this thing. And then at the end, there's a place they had poppies, paper poppies, and you could write messages on these poppies. And then you would put it, they had this big area, they had a statue of a soldier, all in his kit from back 1915. There, and around his feet was just surrounded by poppies, these poppies that people had written notes on. So we were writing messages, so you could write a message and leave it in this pond of poppies at this guy's feet. And so that's at the end, that's what we did. It was an emotional journey going through that thing. But then last night when I'm working on this tree, I found somebody who was actually killed at Gallipoli. And I'm like, oh my gosh, after 40 plus years of doing genealogy research, I've actually come across somebody who was at Gallipoli. The story of Gallipoli just fascinates me. I don't know what the pull of it is there, but there's knowing that I don't have any direct ancestors who were there, and haven't been able to find any in my tree. For some reason, that just pulls to me. I don't know. It's just one of those things that you just, one of those things that you just got to know more about. But their living conditions were appalling. Actually, I think I opened up my photos. Hang on. Is it still open? I wonder if I can. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Now, I don't have, I've got a ton of photographs that were taken at this thing. Like, I was taking photographs of everything. But I want to show you just some of the details that went into some of these statues. Now I'm going to show you the guy who had his last meal. His name was Jack Dunn, who was sentenced to death. But I just want to show you the detail. Actually, I'm going to start with this picture here. Actually, do I only have the one picture of that? I do. Okay, so let's see if I can share the screen here. We're gonna do a little share screen thingy, and I want the photo. This is just on the fly. I hadn't planned on doing this, but we're gonna do it anyway. Window, this one. Okay, so this is in my photos. So this here, let's see, am I sharing the screen? Yes, I'm sharing the screen. Okay. Oops, hang on, wrong way around. Let's do it this way around. There we go. All right. So now I've got to go back and find my. So this is their camp. This is the battle line up here, up the top, and this is what their accommodations look like. This is to scale of what it was. This down here in the corner is the latrine, and there's actually people like laying in the. It was just a log that they sat on to go to the bathroom, and then so this was what their encampment looked like. Let's see if we can. And this tells you where everything is and all of that sort of stuff. And latrine, this is it right here. Let's see. Where's my dad? He looked through the periscope, and this is how they saw over the battle line. So this periscope is right up there at the top of the hill of the thing. This is Jack Dunn having what he thought at the time was his final meal. This statue is 3 times the height of a person. It is actually quite incredible, the detail on this. And so I took it from different perspectives. Here's his can of food. There's a spoon. This is the detail. I mean, look, he's got hairs on his chest here. Look at this is the detail that was in these statues. It was just incredible. And the way they captured the expression on these people, the feelings on these guys' faces. It was a very emotional thing to go through, even though it had been over 100 years since this had happened. This whole Gallipoli display was put on display to commemorate the 100th anniversary of this. But you can see the detail on the face and the look of despair on his face. And there's a fly sitting right here on this stick that he's using to eat. It was just. The only thing is I don't think I have. Look, this is the detail on his arm. You can see the hairs on his arm and the scarring. It was just unbelievable, incredible detail. There's the fly sitting on his hand. He doesn't care. He got the arm that, you can see the pores on the skin in there. And this is his story. He served as a machine gun lieutenant. Jack John Dunn served as a machine gunner with Lieutenant Colonel Malone's Wellingtons. Oh, he may be in my tree somewhere, because I have Dunns that I'm trying to connect up, but this was a different person. He was a Wairarapa lad and keen athlete who rushed to enlist with his brother. Despite being fitter than most, he came down with pneumonia after the first brutal month of fighting. When he returned from the hospital, still pretty crook, meaning sick, the poor bugger fell asleep at his post and was sentenced to death for endangering his unit. It could have been any one of us. Jack was game to the core, unflinching in the face of fire. The general eventually took his reputation and illness into account. On August the 4th, Jack was sent back to the front line. He was 26. And it says, this is the moment Jack Dunn heard he'd got off his sentence. You can see the lower left of the image, bare head, arms to his side, back to the camera. Oh, where was he? What did they say? Lower left. Right here. Here he is, right here. He'd been in prison at Quinn's Post for 17 days since being court-martialed for falling asleep on duty. A day after his release, we set off on our biggest offensive yet. But nobody knows what happened to him. There's another post that's later on that nobody knows what happened to him. They actually lost track of him after that. His military files were like incomplete or something. But that just gives you some idea of the detail that this exhibition went through. It was an incredible experience to go through that. And last night to find that connection, that possible family connection to Gallipoli, I was sort of like, yay, because it going through that exhibition just brought it alive for me in a lot of ways. There's a lot of emotions going through there. Actually, I wonder if I can find the picture of the nurse, because her story was just, pulled at the heartstrings. I'm trying to see if I thought I also took a photo. No. Hang on. Oh, I didn't get a photo of the stack of letters. So this here, let's get this back up again, is the nurse. Oops, hang on. Let me open the picture first. This is what as you walked into this room where she was, this is what we saw. So we walk in and we see the back of her sitting on her trunk. And around the top of the room, up around the top of the room, they actually have her words that is being said. So you can either read it and you can read and hear at the same time. And the voice they have is meant to be her voice of her, it's telling her story. And the words are being seen at the top of the screen. But this is her as you walk around. And here's the ribbon that was around the letters. And you can see the emotion on her face as she gets these letters back that are stamped with "killed in action" on the, but look at the expression on her face. It still gets me. And this is just a photograph of what I saw in person. And it still chokes me up when I see these pictures of what these people, what these guys and these women went through. But she's, 3 times the height of, it's just, their stories were just heart-wrenching. And then this is, it's not a very good picture. Oh, the stamp read "killed, returned to sender." There you go. She was a military nurse on board the hospital. I think I have a better picture. There we go. Which set out from Wellington in July. She hoped to meet up with her brother Letty, who was stuck on Gallipoli, but their paths would never cross. In November, so she left in July, this is now November, all Lottie's letters to Letty came back to her. An official black stamp read "killed, returned to sender." He'd been dead for 4 months, but only the family back home had received the news. Rotty Lote said, "There it is, no mistake, Letty is dead. I felt sick." And this is just some of the stories that was just one of the stories that was at that exhibition. But finding a connection to a time in history brings it alive and makes it more personal for you. If you're I have researched, I've done a lot of research on American families and things and found connections to the Civil War. I've found connections to different historical events for people. And when I find those connections, I'm sort of, oh, let me go find out a little more about that. So when I'm doing the reveal to the client, I can actually put a little bit of history into there saying, that they were involved in this incident, and here's a little more information about that incident. So, and there's one branch of one family tree. In fact, I might see if I can get that person to come on and we can go through that family tree thing again. Because when we did it, I totally forgot to record it. So I do have to go back and record it again. But if I did it this time, I'm going to ask, how did you feel when you first heard this, about this? And we can put some of the historical things into place just to give you a perspective. It also, when you're putting the historical stuff into place, it gives you sort of like a timeline as well. So you get a really good idea of the timeline of when certain things took place, when and where people were born and what was going on at the time as well. Like one of my clients, their fourth great grandmother got kidnapped by marauding Indians. Her husband wasn't home at the time because he was off fighting a battle. So now I've got to go see what battle was he off fighting when she was kidnapped. I haven't looked that piece up yet. So, that reminds me that I have to go and do that. I have to go and look at that. And what was the story about the marauding Indians going through and kidnapping these women and taking them up to Canada and selling them as slaves? This took place in Virginia at the time, back in that day. And, 20 years later, she finally returns home after a French doctor found out what was going on, purchased these women, set them all free and sent them home. And then she gets home, is now greeted by her 1-year-old son. The last time she saw him, he was about a year old, crying in his crib. And this happens to be this client's third great grandfather. That's now, young 20-year-old man. And finds out that her husband had been searching for her for these past 20 years, had finally found out where she was and had left a few days beforehand on horseback to go and find her and bring her home. And so she then gets on horseback and goes after him. And as she's going through the country roads of the country area of Virginia, there's in the article that talks about the story, it does not state where in Virginia it is because it was lost over time as to where it actually was. But there were these people up on a knoll, and they were having a funeral service. So she goes up there to ask them if they'd seen her husband. And it was actually her husband that they were burying at the time, because he had arrived in their little settlement like 3 or 4 days beforehand and had succumbed to a virus infection that he had caught. And they're in the process of burying him. So the article says that she was allowed to look on his face for a minute or so before they continued with the funeral service, and then she returned back home. And I thought, after 20 years, you're finally catching up to, you're finally going to see your husband again after 20 years. That's been keeping you going. Your children have been keeping you, the thoughts of your kids and your husband and everything's been keeping you going. You get home, you find out your husband just left. So you go chasing him to find out that he's dead. I'm like, oh my gosh, the heartbreak, the heartache that goes on with that. And it's what a heartbreaking moment. Could you fictionalize that and make it a happy ending? Absolutely. But truth is stranger than fiction. That's why fiction has to make sense. But this is just one thing that happened with this family. And that, she never got to talk with her husband again. For 20 years, she had been without her husband, without her family, because she'd been kidnapped and sold as a slave up in Canada. And this was back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. I think it's early 1800s. I can't remember. I have to go back and have a look in the tree. But, these are some of the things that took place in history. What historical events have taken place in your ancestor's lifetime that your ancestor was involved with? Were they involved in the Civil War? Were they on the north side or the south side? Which side were they on? Were they, did they see the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II when she was coronated back in, when she had her coronation in 1953? Were any of your ancestors living in England at the time when Henry VIII abdicated his throne and to continue his relationship with the Wallace lady? I can't think of her name right now except for Wallace. Sometimes it just escapes me. Oh, did you have any connection to the Titanic? Did you have relatives that were on the Titanic? Now, in my family, I do have my second great grandmother was a harper. On the Titanic, there was a harper who was the minister. And if you ever see the movie Titanic, you read the stories, there was that priest who was asking people if they had been saved. And he basically went down with the ship. But his daughter and the daughter's nanny were saved. They were put on one of the lifeboats, and but his last name was Harper. Is he connected to my family tree? I don't know. I have not yet found a connection to it, but I'm working on it. And then I had somebody who I met the other day who told me about her great grandfather, and when he came from Ireland across to Canada, and he was trying to get on this one particular sailing, and it was sold out. So he had to wait a few days to go on the next available sailing. The ship that was sold out was the Titanic. And there's just these stories that are coming out. Do people want to know more about this? Yeah. If you had ancestors that were on the Titanic, or was there some connection in your family to the Titanic, about that. Think about some things that took place in history. You've got different wars that went on, World War I, World War II. You've got the Napoleon Wars. You've got the Great Depression that went on here in the United States. You've got the Industrial Revolution, the Irish Potato Famine, the Great Migration, that went on, the Spanish flu, the Black Death, the cholera outbreaks, French Revolution, the Civil Rights movements, the Russian Revolution, when they overtook the Tsar Nicholas II, different natural disasters like tsunamis and earthquakes and dust bowls and hurricanes and, colonizations and settlements and things. In Australia, you had two types of people that immigrated to Australia. There were those that were sent down because it was their punishment as a penal colony, and then you had those that voluntarily went down and settled down there. Did you have anybody that came over from Ireland or something that were then part of the Louisiana land grab thing that they did? Did you have, was your family involved were your ancestors involved with that, with the land grant, involved with land grants and things like that? Come over here and we'll give you this land to help get people colonized and things. So look at these different periods in time. Where were your ancestors at the time? Were they here in America? Were they in England? Were they in Europe? Were they in Ireland? Were they here in the States? Where was your family when certain historical events happened? Were they involved with that? Then you had that great migration across with people in the wagons and things that were moving west. Were they involved with that? Lots of different, there's so much stuff in history. Prohibition, did your family survive? What happened with your family during Prohibition? Were they on the naughty side that had the underground thing going? Or, if you can go look up the Ketchikan Visitors Bureau or something like that. They have these amazing short videos about the history of Ketchikan in Alaska. Ketchikan has a very colorful history. It is awesome. And they will tell you that if you ever read an article, if you saw an article about this is the story behind that article. Did it actually take place? Yes, it did, but this is the true story behind it, and things like that. And they actually have interviews with people who are Ketchikanians, and it will tell you under their name if they're first generation, second generation, third generation, fourth generation Ketchikanian. And these people they've had such a colorful history in Ketchikan. They even talk about Prohibition, because Alaska was put under Prohibition before United States was. They were a territory of the United States at the time when they were put under Prohibition. The United States didn't go into Prohibition until a few years later. But some of the things, this Creek Street was the American government decided that rather than having it spread out through Ketchikan, we're going to put all of the prostitutes in one area. If two or more females occupied a house, it was considered a whorehouse. They were considered prostitutes, even if they weren't. They were just roommates, sharing a dwelling to cut the cost of rent. They were considered prostitutes because there was more than two women in a house. Two or more women in a house. This is all some of the history you can learn when you go visit Ketchikan. It's a very colorful history. And so you got Creek Street there, and Creek Street has these buildings which are built out over the water. And then you walk along the boardwalks, which is also over the water. And there's so many really cool stories there. And like when they, during Prohibition, they had their bottles of liquor, of hooch, because the hooch was actually named after the local Indians. And I think somehow they were involved with, I'm trying to remember, I think they were involved with making it as well. But it got the name of Hooch. See if he's just come over for a scratch, as I say, it's walk time, Mum. You got 30 minutes, sweetie girl. And so they would get in these boats and they would bring them up underneath the piers and knock on the doors for the basements of these buildings, and the trapdoor would open, the bottles would be handed up, the cash would be handed down, they'd move on to the next one. And yet the investigators were trying to figure out, where is all this illegal booze coming from? Then they would stash the illegal bottles in different hidey holes throughout the building. And they would only ever have one bottle of liquor out at a time, and it would cost 50 cents a nip. A nip back in that time was half a teaspoon, which is not a lot, and it would cost you 50 cents. Today, that 50-cent nip in today's money would be $10.52. Well, that was at 5 years ago. I haven't looked up to see what it is in 2024. In 2018, 2019, it was $10.52 for a nip, for half a teaspoon of liquor. But they only ever brought out one bottle. So if they got raided, they only ever lost one bottle. And it turned out that selling the hooch was actually more profitable than the prostitution was. And they had these big dance halls and things. It was just a very, very colorful history that was going on there at the time. And I spent ages standing there reading everywhere. And they have these plaques up. And I just spent ages just wandering around Creek Street and reading every single plaque that was up, every single sign that was up that had a bit of history on there. They had these ones that were one into Creek Street. That was just like a 4-sided thing. And I took pictures of every single one of them so I could read them later on, because I had stories that were starting to take shape in my head about how I could incorporate the history of Ketchikan into a story. It's in the works. But it was just an incredible history. Do I have anybody that lived in Ketchikan? No. Do I have any family from Alaska? No. Not that I have found yet, but more than likely, no. But it's just a fascinating history. It's a fascinating time in history. So if you got anybody that was from Ketchikan in Alaska, I've got a whole bunch of stories I can tell you about that. Even some of the other areas, but Ketchikan just spoke to me when I was there. When I was last there in May of 2019, on my very first cruise 2018, May of 2018, when I was there after my very first cruise since Brad had passed. And Ketchikan just spoke to me. Last time we'd been there, we did this bus tour that took us up to the park where they have the totems, and we got to learn the history of the totems. We got to go to a sanctuary that they have for eagles that can no longer fly. And I tell you, that was the most heart-wrenching thing I ever saw. These beautiful, magnificent birds sitting on a log and just looking up at the sky and knowing that they can't get up there, and just the longing in their eyes to be able to fly and soar like they do. We got taken to a salmon hatchery, and the salmon is all raised in the wild, but they actually do that. They actually have places where the salmon can come and lay their eggs and everything else, and then they leave again. And then they have these pools that they move them into to get them to a certain age, and then they release them into the wild. And then they go down the rivers. And so we learned all about salmon breeding on that one too. That was a really cool thing. So this time I planned nothing except going to the lumberjack show, because I love watching lumberjacks. It was one of my favorite events to go and see at the AMP shows back in New Zealand, which are like your state fairs. But we had in different areas around New Zealand. And that was one of my favorite activities to watch, because it just fascinated me about how these guys could swing these axes. They're standing on a log. They've got their feet on either end of this piece of log, and they're hacking at it with an axe. And like, how is it doesn't slip and slice their legs open? And then they're making the thing to go up the poles. And it just boggles my mind. So I got to go see the lumberjack show. And then I spent the rest of the day just wandering around Ketchikan and learning the history about this place and seeing some of the things and taking lots and lots of photographs of the area. And then when I got back to the ship, I went back to the ship because the ship was right there on the port, and it only took me like 10 minutes to walk to the lumberjack show. So when I went back on the ship, I went and sat in the cafe area because I was on Celebrity Solstice. So I went and sat in their cafe area and got my, what did I get? I got my hot chocolate and a couple of pastries to eat with my hot chocolate. And I sat down and just wrote about all these ideas for story ideas from Ketchikan. And I'd picked up all these different brochures. I'd done a little bit of shopping, picked up all these brochures and stuff on the history of Ketchikan, and maps and all of that. And I've got them all in this one notebook. Well, I didn't get that, and I didn't get the real notebook until I got to Seattle and was at Pike's Place, and there was a woman there who was actually hand making these journals with handmade paper. So these journals were made with handmade paper, and I don't have any of them sitting within reach right now. And they were made with, and they had leather covers on them, and she was stitching them all together so that all the paper was handmade, and they're great. I mean, they're like about, an inch and a half thick. And so I've got one that's going on these stories of from Alaska and things, because I transferred my notes from that into that and started actually writing out different scenes and stuff. And that's my Ketchikan book. But a fascinating history, and there's different places you can go to where there is just amazing history. And now when I go to different places, I'm sort of like, oh, do I have anybody in my tree, or do my clients have anybody in their tree who were in this area when this particular event happened? And so I will go and learn, and rather than going back to my computer and having a look, I'll go learn some of the history and stuff and make notes. I've got these little notebooks I carry, and I make notes into them as I learn different things. I pick up pamphlets and I bring them back, and then I'll go into my client's tree to see, even if I have finished doing the research for them and pass that stuff on, there's still times I come across stuff and I go, oh, that person will be interested in this because of da-da-da-da-da. So the da-da-da-da-das, you never know when it's going to come up. But finding that you have a personal connection to history, it just makes, for me personally, it makes it come alive for me. It makes that time and period. Instead of just learning about a historical event, I now have a vested interest because I have somebody in my tree who was at that thing. So now I want to know more about it because somebody I know was there. So there's all this stuff going on. So get out there, have a look. Where were your family when different historical events were taking place? Go out, learn more about. Go learn what role they may have played in that event, in that historical event, and go look up records to see, if they're in a military battle, where are their military records, their jackets. Go have a look at their military jackets. Were they involved in that particular war, that particular battle? Yes, they were. Well, what happened? Go find out about that battle. No, they weren't involved in that one, but they were in this one over here. Also, go find out about information about that one over there. Go look. What historical events were your ancestors involved with? Were they alive during certain events? Yes, they would have been. But did they actually participate in an event? Like if you're looking at the Spanish flu, was anybody in that family afflicted by the Spanish flu and died as a result of it? You may have people in your ancestry that they lost kids or parents died because of the Spanish flu, the pandemic that was going around at the time. So there's all these different stories that are out there and all these different events that took place in history. What role did your family play in them? Were they just there and that happened around them, or were they actually actively involved in whatever the event was? So that's it from me. Look up historical events for your family tree, and it just adds a little more detail to the story and helps you learn more about what times were like when you can find somebody when you have a connection to a historical event. So that's it from us for today. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening